good evening, depending on where you are. How's it going, Freedom Family? Good morning. Good morning from here. Good evening for most of you guys in the U.S. Or good night, I suppose I should say. Yes, I'm still a little bit sick. Thanks for asking. But today is the second day, and it does feel like it's clearing up. So we'll see. No, thanks for asking. Definitely. Okay. All right. All right. All right. Today, we're supposed to be comparing and contrasting immigration permits, which permit may or may not be right for you. So we'll be getting into that in just a minute. I see y'all piling in, so I'm going to give you one more minute to do that, and then we'll just get started. Yeah, normally I'm here a little bit earlier. This stomach bug, though, has me upside down, so didn't want to cancel though. Just like yesterday. Yesterday I was sick. Like yesterday it hurt. Today it's just the follow up or the after effects. But yesterday I don't know if you guys could tell, but I was in pain all live. It's damn bugs. You never know where you get them from. Okay. All right. Cool, cool, cool. All right, let's go ahead and get into it. All right. Let me see if I have some video stuff that I can throw up here. Let me see. Looks like what? Yeah, okay, let's start with that. All right. Can you guys see that? I don't, let me see here. I don't think I have those options on Instagram. No, I don't have them on Facebook, but I'll try to. No, you know what? It won't fit on YouTube either. All right, if you want to see the documentation, just head over to TikTok. We'll just do it like that. All right, so the big two, the showdown between income and capital, right? For for most of our clients, they're going to be one of the big two. Okay, they're either going to be a Class K permit or a Class G permit. All right, that's typically the way it works for most of our clients. Some of the permits are very niche, right? So some of the permits are relatively difficult to qualify for because they're niche permits. And one of the permits is brand new, okay, which is the Class N permit, okay. But primarily, the Class K there at the top and the Class G, the second one down, are the big two. Those are the two that most people qualify for, okay. Class K leads directly to dual citizenship. That is typically the reason why one of our clients chooses a Class K. Most of our clients that choose a Class K can qualify for a Class G, but because they want dual citizenship down the road, they choose Class K. All right. What are the difference? Class K is essentially a passive income route, right? However, it doesn't have to play out that way. Luckily for us, they weren't super specific in the law as to where the income needs to come from, just where it shouldn't come from, okay? There has never been an individual that wanted a Class K that could not qualify. Sometimes we had to restructure their life a little bit, but with a little bit of restructuring, we never had someone who wanted a Class K that couldn't qualify for a Class K as long as they met the age limit. Now, the minimum age limit is 35 years old. So you have to be a minimum of 35 years old. Anything over 35 is fine. Okay. You have to have a income of $24,000 a year minimum. Okay, $2,000 a month minimum. You have to be able to show income of $2,000 a month minimum. Okay. Now, that permit will not come with the authority to work or the authority to own a business. You can still invest in a business, right? You can buy shares. You can still invest in like securities, but you cannot own a company outright, or take a job, right? So it'd be really hard for you to take a job, kind of like if you were in the United States and didn't have working papers. It'd be really hard for you to take a job because you wouldn't have like a social security number and all that, right? So it'd be really hard for you to take a job, but there are informal jobs. You're not supposed to take those either. Okay. So all of your money is supposed to come from overseas. That gives you a bit of a tax advantage on the ground here because by benefit and virtue of the permit, you're not supposed to be making money here anyway. Okay, so they have a special tax filing that's super, super easy. Excuse me, for people who are not making money here, called the nil filing. And for folks who it's like, well, wait a minute, you have working papers or you have an investor permit, you nil file one too many times, it'll trigger an audit. But for folks with the Class K, you're not supposed to be making an income here, right? So if you nil file your entire 7 years, it would be consistent with your immigration status. So there's a little bit of a bonus there when it comes to tax complexity. All right. Now, on to Class G. Class G is absolutely necessary if you are starting a business that is not covered under the niche permits. We'll get into the niche permits later. I don't typically cover them, but we will cover them today. So if you are starting a business and it's not in the niche permits, what are the niche permits? As far as businesses are concerned, mining. If you're going to start a mining operation, you're coming here to mine gold, right? They just found gold. You're coming here to mine that gold. You would have a specific permit that is niche, that is only for miners, right? That's why we don't talk about it that often. Okay. If you are going to do agribusiness, right? Which actually we have a farm that just came on the market and it's a distressed seller. So look out for an alert for that, to buy that farm. If you're on our alert list, if you're not and you're interested in stuff like that, you probably want to get on our alert list. But I digress. So, if you're doing agribusiness, there is an agriculture permit for agribusiness, okay? Specifically for agribusiness, okay? The difficulty with the niche permits, well, we'll get into that when we cover the niche permits, but there's like these weird additional requirements for niche permits that make them a little bit more difficult. All right, so agribusiness is one, mining business is one, manufacturing business is another, right? So if you're going to manufacture, you're manufacturing cars, you're manufacturing whatever, then there is a permit specifically for manufacturers, okay? So those are kind of your niche permits. Any other kind of business that you're opening up, I'd say probably one of the top three that our clients are into is real estate of some kind is typically number one, right? So real estate is not a niche permit. So you would need a Class G. All right. Any other kind of business like that you might be getting into, you would need a Class G permit. Okay. So Class G permit is going to require $100,000 of capital proof. So what that means is that you would deposit $100,000 into a Kenyan bank account. You're not paying it to anybody, right? Now, I said earlier, as a company, most of our clients who get a Class K qualify for a Class G. right? Why? Because most of our clients who get a Class K are building a house with us that costs more than $100,000. So they're able to put $100,000 into a bank account if they need to. The reason they got Class K is typically so that they get their dual citizenship in 7 years. If they don't care about dual citizenship, a lot of them will go Class G just so that they can open up businesses and operate businesses here from day one. Okay. Class G does not have an age limit, right? A lower limit, right? So in Class K, there's a lower limit of 35. You have to be a minimum of 35 years old to qualify for a Class K, all right? For Class G, there is no lower limit. Okay, you could be 18 years old. If you got $100,000, you can get Class G, no problem, right? So sometimes what we'll also run into is we'll have a client who's well, this just happened. We had a client who's 28, wife is 26. They did a generational wealth trust fund, and then they decided they want to do a trust estate here and set up, a home here and all of that. So they had to come in under Class G, even though they do want dual citizenship. So it just pushes their dual citizenship back further, and they're married. So it's not like, they can come here and see what happens, and then if they get married, then they can get dual citizenship that way. They can't do that. So they're just gonna have to wait till they hit 35, and then we can adjust. The other thing is, even if you're not on a direct path to dual citizenship, we can always apply for it and fight for it later. It's a fight, because it's not a direct path, but we can make the filings and go to immigration, essentially immigration court, and fight for it anyway, right? It's just we have to prove a lot more when you're not on a direct path. So it is still possible, especially if you've been a very beneficial to the country. So there's that. All right. All right. Let's see. The permit has a issuance fee. All permits. All permit issuance fees currently are the same. They're all 250,000 local currency per year issued. A maximum permit, depending on which permit it is 3 years. So that's 750,000 local currency for a maximum permit. Okay. And so the issuance fee alone is typically over $6,000. It's like 6,800 or something like that, right? So your pricing for these permits are in the $12 to $15,000 range, because over 6,000, over half of it is just the issuance fee. The issuance fee comes after the application fee. Comes after you need a surety bond with the government, of a 3-year surety bond in order to get the permit. It's a requirement of the permit. That surety bond has to be a minimum of 100,000 local currency, right? And so there's all these there's biometric fees and all that stuff. So there's all these like government fees for the application side of it that come before you're even allowed to pay the issuance fee. The issuance fee gets paid on issuance. So the good thing about the way they do it, though, is like, were you to apply for something in the U.S. and get denied, you just lose all your money. Like, that's the way the U.S. system works. Even visas, right? Like, if you apply for a visa, you pay whatever the visa application fee is. If you're denied, you lose all your money, right? The good thing about the Kenyan system is if you're denied, you never get to the issuance fee. The issuance fee comes after they say you have been approved. Now you have 30 days to pay the fee for us to issue it to you. So it's actually a good system in the sense that you don't just lose all your money doing the application if the application doesn't work out. Okay? We have a 100% success rate with our clients, so we've never had an application that didn't work out. All right? But it does happen, especially people who apply by themselves. So it does happen where an application doesn't work out, and then you don't lose a whole ton of money, because the ton of money is essentially on the back end after you're approved. Okay. Let's see here. Any questions on that before I go into the new kid on the block? All right. All right. Jumping right into the new kid on the block, the Class N. The Class N is the digital nomad permit. Okay. The chart says that it requires proof of remote employment, but that's not true anymore. Okay. One of the cool things about Kenya is there's a process by which you can submit changes to the government. And if the government recognizes what you're saying, and that you have a strong basis for that change, they actually will change it. All right. So that was true. Our law firm and plenty of other law firms were not singly responsible for this, but our law firm and plenty of other law firms and stakeholders, I suppose, had submitted different changes on the basis of multiple things, on the basis of like digital nomad permits in Asia and Europe didn't require certain things that we were requiring, were much less expensive, so on and so forth. And they got rid of a lot of like the crazy requirements. Like when it first started, one of the requirements was that like you're a digital nomad that makes like 80,000 a year or something like that. And so we showed that that would have made us the most expensive digital nomad permit in the world. And so they got rid of that. And so that's cool because coming from the United States, it is extraordinarily difficult to change a government rule just by having a conversation with people in government, which you can actually do here. So that's refreshing. So while proof of remote employment still works, you can also be a business owner. So you can also own your own LLC, own your own business. However, that business has to not do any business with any local clients, period. Okay? Can't do business with any local clients, period. This is a path of legitimation for a lot of Europeans who were utilizing a loophole to work here previously. Okay? I don't know too many Americans who were doing it, but maybe there were some, but this is primarily a European thing, where you would have like a safari tour company, excuse me, and the booking company would be in Germany, and the website would be in German, and the bank account would be a German bank account, right? And people in Germany would pay in euros to a German bank account to go on safari in Kenya, right? And then they would fly here, and when they got here, somebody would pick them up at the airport, and someone would take them on safari, and then somebody would take them back to the airport, and they would go back to Germany, and they would exchange no money while they were here at all, right? That was key. And so in that respect, they weren't operating a business in Kenya. So they weren't paying Kenyan taxes and they weren't doing any of that, right? They were a booking company. Maybe they booked with someone who had a tour license in Kenya, right? So they essentially paid a Kenyan tourist company some pre-negotiated amount, right? And then they made whatever they made in Germany and supposedly paid taxes in Germany, right? So you would have these people that were running these businesses essentially, but they weren't, on record. They weren't registered. They weren't doing anything in Kenya because they weren't exchanging any funds in Kenya. So one of the kind of outcomes of this new permit was it allowed those folks to say, okay, now I'm a digital nomad. Now I'm living in Kenya. I have a business in Germany. I don't service any Kenyan clients whatsoever. I can remotely do that business from here. Everybody pays me in Germany. My website's in German. My server's in Germany. Blah 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 blah. And then they come here and I take them, on safari, right? So now at least everything is registered and it's all out in the open and the government can like see it essentially, right? So that's one of the kind of ancillary benefits of the digital nomad permit is that people who want to do business like that can do business using the digital nomad permit. Another group of people, and this group has been more American than European, but another group of people that would be able to utilize this for that would be the like wellness people. right? So there's plenty of people that do like wellness retreats, and then but like local people aren't coming for these wellness retreats. They're advertising wherever home is, and it's a bunch of folks from the U.S. or the U.K. or from wherever that have paid for this retreat, and then they show up, and there's this place set up in the woods or whatever, and they go out there and they do whatever they do, and then they go home, right? That would be the same type of thing. Even though they're doing it here, no money is changing hands here, and none of the clients are local people. So that person could use a digital nomad permit. They could also use a Class G permit if they wanted to, right? So typically, what goes on with the digital nomad permit is people who can't afford a Class G. That's essentially, what it boils down to, right? So if they can't afford a Class G, then they go ahead and they do a digital nomad. Digital nomads are brand new, right? So we don't know what the success rate of the digital nomad permit is on the individual yet because they're brand new. Okay, we've done a couple of them. We did the first two and all of that, and that's fine. But like we know that when we bring somebody in on their Class G, they typically stay until permanent residence, right? So they get their permanent residence, so they succeed in their immigration. We know that when we bring in Class Ks, they typically get their dual citizenship, so they succeed in their immigration, right? Over 90%, right? We don't know with the digital nomad because it allows people who traditionally couldn't afford a permit to now come in on a permit, and the risk is that they might not be able to afford to succeed. So we'll find out. This was the first year of the digital nomad permit, so we will find out. All right. Let's see. The other one that we deal with often is a dependent pass. Now, it says spouse, but it's not necessarily spouse. All right. We deal with spousal passes the most, but it can also be the kid. All right. So, and we do have a lot of like single parents and all that come through as well. So if it's a minor child or a spouse, they can have a pass on your permit. Okay. So they can have a pass on that permit. Why not just get two permits? Because a pass is infinitely cheaper, right? So it's like, let's say it's $12,000 you paid for your permit, right? The pass is like 2,500, way cheaper. So yes, you can get two permits, okay? And people who maybe have been a bit rocky, they get two permits. Like if they're married, but they've been a bit rocky, maybe this is their last shot, right? Maybe they almost separated. They're like, you know what? We're going to make this move where we don't know anybody. We're going to try to start over and we're going to see what happens. But if we can't get it together, we're done. And we do get folks like that. Those folks will pay the double and they will get independent permits because they don't want, if they split with the partner that they're already on their last leg with, that now their pass is invalidated because they're no longer married to the person with the permit. So those folks are the folks that typically pay for two permits. Good question, though. Any other questions on that before I move on to the niche permits? Yeah, it rained last night, so now the flies have wings. So they're like all over the place. Not the flies, the ants. The ants. The ants have turned into flies. The ants grow wings when it rains. Am I in Thailand? No, I'm in Kenya. Ooh, good question. If you have a Class G and your spouse has a pass, can the Class G work? Uh-huh. No. No, 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 no. So the Class G permit holder can work. The spouse with the dependent pass cannot. Just because their pass is attached to a Class G does not allow them to work. So if you're going to work, then you need your own, or if you're going to own your own a business as well, then both people need their own Class G. Now, there's a caveat to that, right? When you get a Class G has a path to get an accelerated Class D, which is, I guess we're about to get into the niche permits. A Class D permit is when you're hired by a Kenyan company as an employee. It is a work permit. You cannot start a business on a work permit. Okay. So what happens is when you get a Class G, you have expedited processing for 3 Class Ds. Okay. So that means that you could essentially hire your spouse, expedite her work permit, and then she would actually be allowed, or he would actually be allowed to work for you. Okay. So that is something that you could pull off. But you're still paying for 2 permits, not a pass anymore. So still you need the permit yourself because it's a dependent pass. It means that you're a dependent of the person who has the permit. It means you shouldn't need to work. You're a dependent. All right. So if you want to work or you want to own your own business, then you do need your own pass, your own permit. I'm sorry. All right. Okay. Okay. Now, the part that most people, the parts that most people get jammed up on when they don't have support. Okay. If they get it at all. So if you file on your own, it's like a maybe 50-50 chance that you'll get through, right? But when you get through, you'll typically get the lowest version of the permit, which means that you'll get approved for 1 year. If you get approved for 1 year, that means that you've lost your homestead exemption, right? And so what ends up happening is you typically get an exemption where you can bring in all of your home goods. You can ship them in to Kenya and not pay any import fees, none of that stuff. Just bring your home with you, right? But you have to have a 2-year permit. If the government doesn't trust your application and there's nobody vouching for you, which is what happens when you do it yourself, they'll essentially give you a 1-year permit as a form of probation if they give you a permit at all. But now you lose all those things that you get with a 2-year permit or greater, right? So you lose all of those tax benefits that might come with that 2-year permit or greater. Okay. Now beyond that, when you go to renew, you'll need a tax compliance certificate. And if you don't have that tax compliance certificate, you're screwed. And you typically don't know that if you're doing it yourself. You typically don't even know how to get it, right? And so that's one of the number one ways that we see people get deported. They'll try to renew, they can't renew, they know where you are because you have a permit. Your date passes and you didn't renew and you're done. And your time just got screwed. You just lost, a year of your 7 years, or if you been there for, like, if you got 2 years, then you went through 2 years. Now you lost 2 years of your 7 years, or God forbid you got 3 years and you didn't get your compliance certificates. Now you lost all 3 years of 7 years, that's the worst. So again, make sure you're working with a professional, because you might think that you did it and all you did was set yourself up for failure. Class G permits. Class G permits have essentially stated that they're going to be doing business in Kenya, right? It requires you to open a company. Okay, it requires you to submit a business plan, which we write for our clients, the business plan and all of that. All those things are required for a Class G permit. So there's a significant risk of audit your first year here to see if you paid all your taxes, if you paid your sales tax, which is called VAT, which is quite standard internationally. We don't have VAT in the United States, but most countries do. To see if you paid excise tax, depending on what you're doing, if you're importing things and stuff like that. To see if you paid any capital gains tax, to see if you paid your corporate income tax, and all of that stuff. So when you're on Class G versus Class K, you're not expected to have made any money. So there's no reason to really audit you, right? Class G, they're expecting you to make a bunch of money. So there's more of an incentive for them to audit you right away. So make sure your bookkeeping is on point and you understand the local bookkeeping and local accounting practices. All right. Okay. All right. Now we can get into some of the more niche permits, right? A Class A permit is for miners and prospectors. Okay, we've never issued a Class A permit. You still need the same $100,000 that you would for a Class G permit, but you need a mining license on top of that. Okay, so you need a mining license on top of that, and you need to get the mining license from the Ministry of Mining before you apply for the permit. A lot of people mess that up. They'll apply for the permit and then apply for the license. You're going to get denied, and you're going to lose your application money. A Class B is for farmers. Now, we've done Class Bs before. So a Class B is for farmers. The issue with the Class B is that you have to buy the land up front. That actually works out really well with a lot of our clients, because what ends up happening is we have packages, like our end of year package right now comes with land, right? Sometimes, like right now, we actually have a distressed seller who's selling a farm. The farm already has irrigation, all of that stuff, right? So it's actually a really good buy. And it's a 5-acre farm, I believe. I'd have to double check. But it's a 5-acre farm. We haven't announced it yet because we don't have the due diligence on the ownership done yet. But as soon as the due diligence on the ownership comes back and we know it's clean, we'll announce it for you guys. But it's a distressed seller, so it's going at a really, really decent price. And it already has irrigation, and the farmhouses are built, and all of that stuff. It's already done, right? So it's a farm in a box. Those folks can get the farmer's permit if they want, instead of the business permit or the investor's permit. But you got to buy the land first. So when we package everything out, which we typically package immigration in with land ownership and all of that, right? So when we package everything out, we can process the land on the front end of the package so that you can qualify for a Class B permit if you want to do agriculture or animal husbandry, right? So either or. We actually had a client who has a horse ranch. And instead of doing the investor permit, they did the farmer's permit for the horse ranch, right? So it's an option. Depending on what you're doing, the Class G might still be better, because under the Class G, depending on the type of business you're doing, there are sometimes tax holidays. So under the Class G, you might get 7 years tax exempt, 7 years 50% tax exempt, whatever, right? So there's that. Class F. Class F is the one we wish we would see more often, especially in the Black community. But Class F is a manufacturer's permit, right? You have to be a factory owner. You have to be approved, or not approved, but you have to prove that you're actually setting up a manufacturing infrastructure and get a manufacturing license, right? So manufacturing permits are the ones that folks utilize to set up like Chinatowns, right? Where their business is going to be, they're going to manufacture something and possibly retail it in Chinatown, but at the same time they're going to be either kicking that thing back out to the territory of origin, or they're going to have half their logistics in the territory of origin, right? So for communities in America where they're going to create an economic base outside of the United States, the same as the Chinatowns do, or the little Havanas do, or the little Tijuanas do, or the little Osakas do. This is the license that would allow for that to happen, which is why we love to see it in that community, because obviously, historically speaking, that has been a 100% success rate method of lifting communities out of poverty in the United States, is to create a system similar to a Chinatown system. And that's the way you do it. So that is a class F. It's for factory owners only, essentially, manufacturing factory owners. All of them still, there's no way around the 100,000. So it's not like you're gonna get into one of these investor entrepreneur classes and not come up with the 100,000. Class G, Class A, Class B, Class F, they still require the 100,000. Okay. Now, there are professional classes, right? We get asked about Class D a lot. Class D is a professional class. It's an employee class, right? So it's for foreigners with a specific job offer from a Kenyan company. You cannot open your own company and then give yourself a Class D. It doesn't work that way. But you can give your spouse a Class D. All right. But to open your company, you need a Class G. Okay. Now, where a lot of people screw up on this, and really, I guess it's not them screwing up, because with the Class D, the company essentially handles all the heavy lifting. So with the Class D, you typically don't pay anything. The company pays everything and brings you in, right? So that's the way that particular permit works. Now, the place where the company screws up, and I suppose, and by virtue of them screwing up, they screw you up, is that there should be a Kenyan understudy to replace you. And they have to prove that no Kenyan could have done the job or wanted to do the job, which is a tough sell right now. And then they have to have like an apprentice training under you to replace you. Okay, so that's the way the Kenyan system works, which is actually pretty awesome, in my opinion, anyway. Now, a Class C is a prescribed professional. So we're talking about a doctor, an engineer, even accountants, actually. All right. However, that professional must register in advance with the local registration body in Kenya, as well as the registration body in their home country, right? So if you're, for example, a nurse, right? You're maybe you're a master's of nursing, right? So you're an MSN, and then you come over and you want to use that to be a prescribed professional. You would need your license from the State Board of Nursing, wherever you're coming from. So your New Jersey State Board of Nursing license. And then you would have to get your license converted prior to your application with the Kenyan Nursing Authority, right? The Kenyan Nursing Board, and go from there. So same thing with doctors, same thing with lawyers, same thing with, all of those professionals, engineers, architects, all of that. So you would need to join the local version of whatever the national board is and go from there. All right. All right. Next niche permit. Let's see if I can. No. There we go. Next niche permit, all right? This one is fairly popular, fairly, is your Class I. Class I permit is your missionary and charities permit. So NGOs, churches, when you hear somebody say, "Oh, I went to Kenya as a missionary," blah 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 blah. A lot of times they come in a Class I permit. Okay, there has to be a registration under the Societies Act, and the organization must be registered in Kenya and prove your presence benefits the country. Okay, so if it's a church, that there has to be a sister church in Kenya, right? And that sister church has to be there, to bring you in, and they have to be registered, in Kenya. If it's an NGO, you can register that NGO. You go to the NGO board, you can register that NGO in Kenya, right? So it can't just be, oh, I have a 501c3 in the United States, and my 501c3 is going to do a project and, I don't know, build a school or something in Kenya, and therefore we all get Class I, immigration permits. Wrong. You have to set up the NGO here, not depend on your, 501c3 back home. Okay. And the last one, the Class M permit, is a refugee permit. So we have never had anybody operating under that permit, right? Um, Typically, those people come through the UN, right? So typically, those people come through the UN, and that's it. So yeah. So Class M permits typically come through the UN. I guess Kenya has taken in quite a few refugees from neighboring African countries, and then when they need to work, they need a Class M permit. No Americans, Canadians, UK have ever been refugees here, not through us, and I don't know of any of who have attained that status. So the refugee permit essentially just doesn't apply. All right. Lifestyle permits. Okay, what are referred to as lifestyle permits are your Class K. Class K is a lifestyle permit. All right. So Class K requires you to be 35 years or older, right? And you have to make $2,000 a month or $24,000 a year of guaranteed income. That's a whole nother life. Some people will say it has to be passive income or you have to be retired. That is not true. Passive income will qualify you, and retirement will typically qualify you. So people who don't know what they're doing, or people who just want to be lazy and don't want to do the hard work to qualify people, will sometimes call it a retirement permit or a retirement visa, so that they only attract those people, so that they don't have to do the work to get you qualified, and they'll just let your retirement qualify you, and that's fine, whatever. But for specialists and professionals, we can qualify you without you being retired. That's why the age is 35 plus. If it was for retirees, the age would be 65 plus. All right, so it's not a retirement anything. But you have to have $24,000 a year or $2,000 a month in income, and you're strictly forbidden from working for a Kenyan company. Okay, strictly forbidden from working for a Kenyan company. Can't tell you how many people screw up their dual citizenship with that, because it'll work. You'll be able to do it, and nobody will stop you. And as soon as you apply for your citizenship, the Kenyan version of FBI, they're called DCI, will immediately have every record of you working in this country that you shouldn't have been working, and permanently deny your dual citizenship. All right. Dependent passes. Dependent passes are considered lifestyle permits. Lifestyle permits are essentially family permits, right? So a dependent pass is considered a lifestyle permit. And so it's for spouses and children of permit holders. Now, if you are the spouse of a G class permit or a D class permit, you cannot work. All right. If you have a pass, you cannot work. If you want to own your own business too, or you also have a business, just like your G class permit holding spouse, then you need a G class permit, unless it qualifies under like an N class or whatever. But if you want to work, you need your own permit. Now, your spouse, the G class permit holder, can grant you a D class permit under their company, right? They have expedited access to 3 D class permits. But remember, and again, this is where people F up. If you have a D class permit, you have to have a Kenyan understudy to replace you. So if you just want to have your wife working, and so you give her a D class permit, but you never find the apprentice that your wife is training, you would be in violation of the D class permit as a company. Your wife wouldn't be in trouble, you would be. The G class permit holder would be. All right? So make sure you do that the right way. Student pass is the last lifestyle permit. A student pass is a student at any Kenyan institution. You need an admissions letter from a recognized school. All right. And it's valid for the duration of your studies only. Okay, so when the duration of the studies ends, then you need a new either pass or a new permit. Okay, or you need to be like applying for dual citizenship at that point. We have seen a bit of that. Like we've seen people like getting their PhDs and then they get married somewhere in between, and then by the time they get their PhD, they've been married for 7 years, and so they come out of the PhD with the qualification to become a dual citizenship via marriage. So that is possible. All right. Any questions on those permits? Most of you guys will fall under G, K, or N, right? The vast majority of folks will fall under G, K, or N. Okay? G, K, or N. Remember that N is new, so we're not sure what the overall success rate of N is going to be. We're sure that every time we apply for an N, we get it, but we're not sure that essentially making it cheaper is a good idea. So we're going to find out. Right. That's one of the beautiful things. There's a lot of people that will complain about the immigration prices, which obviously we can't control. So it's neither here nor there. But there's a lot of folks that like complain about the price, but the price almost ensures that the person will succeed. It ensures that someone who can afford to succeed is the only person who takes on the opportunity. So the digital nomad permit puts us in a situation where we're not sure if we've like violated that, and those people won't be able to afford to succeed here. There's no such thing as a retirement permit. So a Class K permit is a permit that retirees use, right? But there's no such thing as a retirement permit, and the issue becomes that the people who say that are typically people who are not specialists. And so what they're trying to do is they're trying to not do the work on the qualification end of the permit. So if you're retired, you typically slip through the Class K qualification process because of your retirement. But the Class K permit is not designed specifically for retirees. That's not what it's actually made for, right? So that's why they allow anyone who's 35 or older to get the permit, not people who are 65 or older, okay? The Class N is about $9,000, right? So the classes above that are like $12,000 and $15,000. And remember, these prices are all for max permits, right? So when we apply for a permit, we just because of how well we write the application and all that, we always get a maximum issuance. So we've never had someone get like a 1 year permit or any kind of nonsense like that. Chris Gitong is wondering, do y'all involve Kenyans in your growth or just yourselves? It kind of depends, doesn't it? Because the law says if you get a Class K permit, you're not allowed to work for a Kenyan company at all, right? So if the government is saying, hey, no matter what your skills are, you're not allowed to go work on this permit until you get dual citizenship, then it would be illegal for that person to go out there and start a business now, wouldn't it? So what an immigrant's definitely not going to do is break the law. Now, for a Class G permit, then you have to own a company and you have to hire Kenyans unless you can prove that no Kenyan can do the job. So again, by law, a Class G permit holder would be involving Kenyans. So permit holders don't break the law. It's people who come here illegally and then open businesses illegally that maybe don't involve Kenyans, as long as it's legal to involve Kenyans. Class K yeah, it would be 15 as a standalone situation. When it's wrapped up in a package, then you typically get a better price point. So if you think about the end of the year package that's going on now, that includes the land and the home construction and the immigration and the trust fund. If you think about it, you're paying less than 15 because it's in that bundle. But some people come to us just for immigration, and then we can't do economies of scale and lower that price point. What's the maximum? It depends on the permit. It's either 3 years or 2 years, but it depends on the permit. What about, you talk about an I-class permit? What about an I-class permit? You're asking what an I-class permit costs? It's the same. Because the I-class permit would be in the, it would be in the 10 to 12,000 range. Because the issue with the permits is the main kind of cost of the permits is the issuance fee. The government issuance fee after they approve your permit is 250,000 shillings per year, right? So let's say you get a 3-year permit, which is a max permit, right? So you get a 3-year permit. That's $750,000. That's like 6,800 US dollars, right? So think about it. If you're paying, 12,000, that's just the issuance fee. That's not the application fee. That's not the biometrics fee. That's not the your foreigner certificate fee, which is like your national ID card. That's not, you need 100,000 surety bond with the government in case the worst case scenario happens. The insurance bond will buy you a ticket home. And these are all requirements of the permit. So that's just the issuance fee. That's the last fee you pay the government, is already more than half of the service charge for the permit, right? So the government fees are the bulk of those fees, and then you have your legal fees with the law firm that's doing all the stuff for you and all of that stuff, right? So because that issuance fee never changes, and the application fee doesn't change, and the surety bond doesn't change, and the bulk of the government fees don't change, most of the permits cost about the same thing. The only difference is with some of that is with your I-class permit and your D-class permit, the organizations often pay for you, or they pay the bulk of it for you. So if you're coming as a missionary, the church might be paying for you. If you're coming as a Class D, the company has to pay for you, right? Because you're employed by the company. So they have to do it. And they have to prove why a Kenyan couldn't have done the job for them to hire you. And then if they prove that a Kenyan can't do the job and they hire you, then by law, there has to be a Kenyan understudy that you're training to replace you. All right. So that has to be there. I'm a Kenyan working with a partner in the U.S. Any risks of me being the face and him being a ghost? I don't know what you're talking about. So what happens after the 3 year permit? You renew it. Yep, you renew it and you pay again. That's why, like, a lot of people are like, oh, well, if I'm not getting dual citizenship, why would I bother with permanent residence? Because if you don't get permanent residence, you will renew forever. So every 3 years, you're going to pay $10,000, $12,000, or $15,000 again, right? So once you get to a point where you can apply for either permanent residence, which means that you've paid once and you get it permanently and you don't have to pay again, or dual citizenship, which means that all restrictions are now lifted from you and you're a Kenyan. You want to do that ASAP. And there are situations in which you can get permanent residence in closer to 3 years than 7, but there's no way to get citizenship any faster than 7 years. I mean, my partner has no permits because I'm the face of the company, but he is a recognized partner. When you say a recognized partner, are you saying that on the CR12 he's listed as a director shareholder? Is that what you're saying? Because I don't know what you mean by recognized partner. Or do you have a limited liability partnership and he's listed as a partner on the CR12? So explain that to me just a little bit more, because the answer changes depending on your actual explanation. So yeah, you will renew at the same rate unless the government changes the prices, which they did, what, 3 years ago? It used to be all 3 years, the issuance fee was 100,000 a year. So for all 3 years, your issuance fee was only 300,000. Right now, 1 year is almost 300,000. 1 year is a quarter million now. So they really, really increase the prices. That could happen at any time. And unfortunately, like back then, we were talking to people and we were like, you want to do it? You want to do it? And they were like, let me wait. Let me wait. I'm going to do it, but let me wait. And then they waited until the price more than doubled. Right. So it was like a 500% price increase. And then some of those people couldn't even afford it at that point. So there is something to be said to getting the clock started, because you got a 7 year clock, no matter what, if you're going for dual citizenship, especially. So we got a lot of people that start the clock before they ever even get here. Like they'll get their permit, but they won't come live here permanently on that permit. But they'll just get the clock started, because the faster you get the clock started, the better off you are. Yeah, you need support. You need a professional to make sure that you don't, because you can have a permit, and then depending on how you renew the permit, or if you get a denial on the permit, which is the risk of having a 1 year permit, it can upset your timing, because a lot of the timing is consecutive. Like if you read the law, it'll say that you needed a permit for this amount of consecutive years, right? So if you take a break and then you come back, or you get a denial and you don't fix that denial, your consecutive timing will be disrupted. And then when you apply for dual citizenship or for permanent residence, you'll get a rejection, and then your time starts all over. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. If you get a 1 year permit, which most people who do it themselves, the government purposely gives them a 1 year permit because they don't actually trust them yet. Um, Now there are 7 chances of being denied. Whereas if you get a max permit, there's only 2 chances. There's only 2 renewals on a max permit, whereas there's 6 more renewals on a single year permit. So your chances of being denied on a single permit are more than double than a max permit. No, permanent resident means that you only pay once and you never have to pay again. An ordinary resident, which is a class K permit, is where you would pay the same thing every time you renew. So yeah, every time you renew, you'd come back in, you pay the same thing. You'd only have to pay it once though, because think about it. If you have, and that's the price of a class G, by the way. But so if you have a class K and you're paying 12,000, right? So you pay 12,000, you know, and you got your class K done. You would pay 12,000 again, and you're at 6 years, right? So if you pay 12, the second time you pay the 12,000, you're at 6 years. Remember the requirement for a class K. You have to at least make 24,000 a year, right? So from the government standpoint, you should have the money, right? And again, I really like the old way that they did it before they introduced the class N, because it did ensure that only people who could afford it got it. Now I don't know. I think we're gonna see some problems with that class N. But you come back in 3 years later, right? And you pay your 12,000 again. You get 3 more years, so that's six. How many years do you need to get your dual citizenship? 7, right? So after you've paid that, the next year you only have to renew 1 year, which you can do, right? So instead of paying the 12,000, it's dramatically less. I can't even think of what it is off the top of my head, but it's only 1 year, right? So you pay that 1 year, and then after you pay the 1 year, 6 months before the year is up, we start your dual citizenship application, right? So whole different ball game, right? Whereas if you, for example, were doing 1 year at a time, now they get 6 bites at the apple to deny your application, and they typically deny it at like year 4. How do you get permanent residence in 3 years? Well, the easiest way is to be married. So if you're married to a Kenyan for 3 years, you can apply for permanent residence instead of waiting for 7 years to apply for dual citizenship, right? Because if you're waiting for the 7 years, you're still in a situation where you're paying for something. Now, in that situation, it might just be a pass, right? It might be a spousal pass, but you're still paying for something on some sort of annualized basis until you're a dual citizen. So the option of saying like, hey, maybe screw dual citizenship at least for now, and let me just be a permanent resident, is there if you're married. The other way that you can do it is if you made an extraordinary impact, right? So if you've made an extraordinary impact, which can typically be quantified by like, I don't know, you got 100 employees. You know what I mean? So you have a Class G permit. You own a company legally. I'm being challenged on TikTok. Let me solve the puzzle. It's one thing I hate about the TikTok lives. All right. Sorry about that. I got challenged again on TikTok there. So, you own a company. You're under Class G. You can legally own a company in Kenya. You have 100 employees, right? Typically, everybody you hire affects 6 people, right? So everybody that you're giving a paycheck to affects 6 other people. So if you have 100 employees, you have an economic impact on 600 Kenyan lives, right? You can then say, hey, listen, I've been here. I haven't broken any laws. I've paid my taxes. I employ 100 people. I have an economic impact on 600, people. Can I just have, permanent residence? And then, it's up to the Inspector General of Immigration to grant or deny that request, right? Obviously, if you have a solid legal team behind you and they draft it, as a legal draft, there's a much higher chance that works out for you. So again, having professionals back you up makes all the difference in the world. Okay. Oh, is that why it makes me do that challenge? Okay, TikTok is saying please tap and share the live. So you guys on TikTok, that's why it keeps making me do those puzzles, because you guys aren't tapping the live. All right, you guys on Facebook and YouTube and wherever else, don't worry about that. But you guys on TikTok, please tap the live and share it and all of that so that it doesn't keep interrupting us. All right. So hopefully that answered the question. Thank you for the likes. I see the likes coming through. Thank you. Oh, I can see who's liking. Thanks, Henrock. Thanks for liking. Very cool. All right. Whew, the digital nomad is actually the digital nomad, because it's new, it's pretty involved. Like we have to get like a letter of no contest from your government. So the two that we did, we had to go to the embassy and get, and it was a pain in the ass because one of the two that we did was a Canadian. Well, the Canadian government will tell you that they don't even issue those letters. So you have to go to Canadian embassy, which is not called the Canadian embassy. It's called like the High Command or some nonsense like that. But anyway, you have to go to the Canadian embassy, and like they have to essentially make something up and put their seal on it. And then you have to get back to the government with that. The U.S. does have something because you can lose your citizenship in the United States for taking a job with a foreign government without permission, right? It's one of the only ways that you can lose your citizenship if you're an American citizen, right? So they actually do have a piece of paper that says, you know, the U.S. is granting permission to blah, 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 blah. So they repurpose that for the digital nomad. But yeah, you have to have like essentially a letter of permission from your government to work as a nomad. And I assume it's for government workers, but they don't make that caveat. So everybody has to do it. But I assume it's like, okay, if you're a government worker and you're allowed to work remote as a government worker, then we need permission from your government to let you do that work here. But everybody has to get like the permission. So that's an added like hurdle that we have to cross for digital nomads. So digital nomads are definitely a little wild. The original requirement on income was crazy, but they like repealed it. So now the income requirement isn't there anymore. But because of that, it depends on how good your application is, because now they can kind of make a determination on whether or not you can afford it at the immigration officer level, which for the other permits, they can't do that, right? So if your application doesn't look good to the immigration officer reviewing it, they can decide like, nah, we don't think so, and kick that application back. So digital nomads are definitely the riskiest ones currently because they just don't have a whole lot of history on them. No, 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 no. You the $100,000 requirement for most of the investor class permits is not paid to anyone, right? So you just have to show you have it, all right, which I appreciate from the Kenyan government. So you can't have a business on paper, or you opened up some fake LLC that doesn't do anything, talking about you're an entrepreneur or any of that. Like that's not going to work. It's put up or shut up for any of the business permits. Either you got a real business and you got the money to actually operate a business, or you don't, and you got to prove it with money, not words. So I definitely support that. Yeah, no, the worst thing in the world is to be set up for failure, right? Like if you're put in a position where this thing is gonna fall apart for you, that is the worst thing in the world. And I gotta give Kenya its props, at, making sure that its setups protect you from failing. And I don't think it wants that. Like I don't think it wants its citizens to be employed for 6 months, and then the business goes, the business goes out, and then now they're all unemployed all of a sudden, and all of that stuff. Like they're setting it up that when someone comes in and they're talking all that good stuff about I'm gonna create jobs and I'm gonna support my people and I'm gonna da 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 da, they talking all that good noise. They want to make sure it's real. It's not just some pipe dream and you're messing with people's lives. And people are relocating to work for you and all kinds of nonsense. And then they end up in a horrific situation. And you know what I mean? Especially if it's something that you believed in enough to kind of put up everything for you. Maybe you sold your house, back home. Maybe you took out loans. Maybe you whatever. Under some kind of false, or delusion that you could do this with $5,000. You know what I mean? They protect you from yourself on that. So I definitely appreciate that because there's definitely a ton of relocatees that fail within the first year. You see it all the time in Ghana. People will go to Ghana and then they'll end up back in the United States because they weren't ready and they couldn't afford it, but they'll twist it into there's corruption or this or that and the third. When the truth is, when you really look at a lot of these cases, it was them. They couldn't afford it. They tried to move the Ghana with $1,000, talking about you can buy a house for $100 out here. You know what I mean? And they messed themselves up. So the country protects you from that, which I think is great. Yeah, there's still dumb mistakes you can make. There's that, but typically, if you can get here, you can afford to do it. The people who still fail and still can't afford it typically are illegally immigrating. So typically, those people are coming here on a tourist visa, and then every 90 days they'll walk across the border into Uganda or something like that and then walk back for another 90 days. So that becomes their life, which sucks, right? Every 90 days you're running across a border, right? Because you can get an extension, but at some point your extension is going to be denied. If you get an extension every 6 months, at some point they're going to be like, wait a minute, you're illegally living here, you're illegally immigrating here on a tourist visa. That's not allowed in any country, right? Some countries don't enforce it as much as others, but that's not allowed in any country. So those are the folks that typically they're here, for however long they're here, and then they fail because they couldn't afford to come here the right way, and so they can't afford to be here. And so the pricing definitely protects the people who are actually coming here by proving that they can, without it being some kind of weird, like, if you're good at talking you can talk your way through it. Like, no, put up or shut up, that's it. Yeah, you seen somebody advertising for that? Yeah, there's entire like Facebook groups and stuff where they'll be like, yeah, just do border runs. That's right. So it's kind of crazy. It's kind of crazy to like leave the United States and then come out here and start hopping the border, right? The same thing politicians who are against immigration in the US are complaining about people hopping certain borders in the United States. You going to take your happy butt down here and start hopping borders, right? So it's pretty ridiculous when we see it happen. But those people never last because they have nothing, right? And everything they get, they get it illegally, and you can tell. Like when you look in the system, you can tell if someone got something the right way or someone got something illegally. So the instant they start that game of like trying to illegally pay some government official to give them something they shouldn't have, every other person that they approach for something, whether it's appropriate or whether it's inappropriate, from that point on, can essentially look at their file and tell that they bribed somebody to get something. And so now they need a bribe too, right? If you do everything the right way, no one will ever ask you for a bribe. Our clients, it's extraordinarily rare that they ever come back to us with any story about somebody trying to get some money off of them, because everything they do is legit, right? And so what happens is people go to jail for bribes out here. Like they talk about corruption, but people go to jail all the time. Two cops just got arrested yesterday for trying to take a bribe on the road to Deanne from Liconi, right? And so people go to jail out here for that nonsense. So when they look at your file and they see that you're 100% legit, right, and you have all the sequential information you should have in your file and you did everything the right way, they're afraid that you're like an informant. So they won't approach you like that. Like they're afraid that you'll end up sending them to jail, because literally on a daily basis people get arrested out here for bribery. So it's not like Nigeria, you know what I mean? It's not like Ghana, where if you report it, nothing happens. If you report that somebody asks you for a bribe out here, it's over for them, right? So those things don't happen to people who do things the right way, which is a beautiful situation. Like we don't typically like to be in situations where every day someone's asking us for ill-gotten gains, right? So the people complaining about it, they started something the wrong way. They paid a bribe early on in however they got here, and now when anytime someone opens up their file, they can see like, you never applied for a KRA pin, but you have one. How did that happen? You paid a bribe to get one? Oh, okay. Well, now pay me mine, right? They can just see it. There's nothing you can do to cover that up unless you hire, an attorney and like start over, right? And then you essentially like wipe that file and start a new one, right? So don't do it. Don't do it. And you'll notice, wherever you saw the person, advertising for that, you'll notice that they complain about everything. I guarantee you that exact same person is complaining about paying different prices here or there and having to bribe government officials for every little thing and like all those people who are complaining in that way, it's them. They're the ones who started this thing the wrong way, and now they're stuck there. Thanks for the likes, man. Oof, you've been doing heavy lifting, Henrock. Thank you, brother. Oh, the likes, it's a TikTok thing. Yeah, only the TikTok people can do it. Ask them. Ask them. They'll be able to tell you. If they haven't told you anything, then they're paying for it, and it'll be a Class I permit. Oh, I'm sorry. For the rest of you guys, the question was, I'm going. What was it? I'm going to Kenya on a mission trip in April. Do I have to pay anything for a permit? So I don't know the answer to that. Whoever the missionaries are, ask them. But a lot of times they just cover that. So the NGO or the church or the whoever it is, they cover, whatever it costs. Now, if they're asking, sometimes like the church will take in like an offering. So they'll be like, oh, we're doing our mission thing. Everybody give what you can, right? That's to cover the permit cost typically. If it's an NGO, they typically pay for it. NGOs typically operate like companies. So they typically have a budget and they budget for it. Class D. Class D, you have to be hired by a Kenyan company. And the part that most people F up, you also have to have a Kenyan understudy who is there to replace you, right? So Class Ds are not meant to be permanent. Class Ds are meant for you to come and do some work that Kenyans can't do, and then you train Kenyans how to do it. All right. So a Class D, if you plan on relocating, you typically have to convert to something else anyway. So you might as well have a Class G, right? So even if that company, for example, and that's part of like we do this on a negotiation level sometimes for certain clients, where they have the wherewithal to realize that the Class D is a bit of a pain in the ass. So they'll come to us and be like, all right, listen, I want you to negotiate with this employer to pay for my Class G, and then I'll do the job as an independent contractor under that Kenyan company. Now they can stay here forever and they don't necessarily need to have a Kenyan understudy. That replaces them, right? So they're not wasting time, right? They're not wasting time towards permanent residency on a Class D that maybe expires before they get to their 7 years, which would break their chain, right? Because it has to be consecutive. So they don't want their chain to be broken. So if they have the wherewithal, they'll either sign a 7-year contract and they'll like try to get the employer locked into keeping them for 7 years no matter what, which most employers will not do, or they'll get our law firm involved and then we'll negotiate that, okay, you hire this person as an independent contractor, they'll do the same job for you, but as an independent contractor, and then you're paying the same amount of money for a Class G as you would a Class D, right? It all costs the same. So you just get that company to then pay for the Class G permit and go from there. So do you think it's more expensive to get a proper visa to the United States now? To the United States? Yeah. Well, it's not that it costs more, it's that they're denying everyone, right? So like I have a friend that works at the US Embassy here. They're approving, for tourists anyway, they're approving like 2 a day. So if they have, 5,000 applicants a day, then 4,998 of them are getting denied, and they don't do it the way that it's done here. So you lose all that money. So they're almost like funding the embassies off of denials, like visa denials. You guys keep talking about visas. It's not about a visa. These are permits. All right. So Bantu, a visa, there are no visas in Kenya, as a matter of fact. Kenya has gotten rid of visas. Kenya has the same system as Seychelles. They have electronic travel authorizations. Your visa, right, or what has replaced it, which is an ETA, an electronic travel authorization, is something that you apply for when you buy a ticket to come here. It has nothing to do with your ability to immigrate. All right, your immigration is a permit. The permit for volunteers is a Class I permit. All right, Class I permit is a permit for a volunteer. Because if you're volunteering for a charity or an NGO. So it states right there, Class I, charities, NGOs, churches, missionaries. That is for a volunteer. All right. A visa, or whatever its equivalent is, which in this case is an ETA, allows you entry into a country. It does not authorize you to immigrate. It does not authorize you to work. Same as America, right? A visa just authorizes entry into a country, right? You need a permit to immigrate or to work or to do something within that country. We just happen to call our residency permit a green card. That's what a green card is. It's residency permit. Yeah, now there's still like, as far as like immigrant visas to the US, there are still ways to like make that happen a little bit better. So like Henrock, we typically, if we're going the opposite way, like if we're sending someone to America, which we don't do often, but if we are, we'll use the L1A program. L1A program is still operating as normal, right? But with this particular administration, the B1, B2, not doing too well. Not doing too well at all. But your B1, B2 is your typical tourist visa. Gold Card is actually still in the EB program, Donna. So it's just a fast tracked EB. So if you got the money, I mean, go for it. Sometimes, but not often. It's actually oh, I'm sorry. So the question was, do we have U.S. passports as part of the passport portfolio program for our generational wealth clients? So the answer is sometimes, but not often, because a U.S. passport is is typically a burden on a passport portfolio. So typically, a U.S. passport is there because the person creating the passport portfolio was a U.S. citizen from the onset, right? So that's the citizenship they started with, right? But beyond that, like if like our Canadian and our UK people, that's not part of their passport portfolio journey, because as soon as you pick up that passport, you're taxed on worldwide income, right? All U.S. citizens are taxed on worldwide income, right? So if you have a UK passport and you start your passport portfolio journey, the last passport you would ever want is a US passport or a North Korean passport, which nobody ever asked for, obviously, or an Eritrean passport, right? Those three countries tax you on worldwide income no matter what. So if you didn't start with a US passport, but you're doing a passport portfolio for generational wealth, the last passport you want is a US passport. Most other passports will charge you on your global income if you're a tax resident. So if you're living there in the moment, then they'll tax you on your global income, right? So if you have a UK passport and you live in the UK, then they might tax you on your global. And they used to not. I know that they did a rule change. They used to not. They used to only charge you on your UK income, but they might tax you on your global income then. So if you move out of the UK, but you're still a UK citizen, and you establish that the UK is not your tax domicile, then you would not be charged by the UK on anything. The US is different. If you move and you establish that the United States is not your tax domicile, you still have to file a a tax filing yearly. Now you may not have to pay anything, but that's based on the way that the laws are operating currently, right? So if you're doing like an FEIE and you qualify for that, well, then the first $130,000 that you make every year under FEIE would be excluded from taxable income, right? You would still have to let them know about it though. So they're still tracking your bank accounts and the money you're making or whatever. You just might not need to pay anything. But if they were to repeal FEIE, next year, all of a sudden you would have to pay, and they'd have 10 years of records that you made this amount of money every year. Oh, and magically the year after FEIE got repealed, you stopped making money, right? So they're going to come for you. So that becomes the issue with the U.S. passport. So typically in a passport portfolio clients, if they don't already have a U.S. passport, that is not one that they're going after. That's a really hard question to answer as well. The question was for the rest of you live streams, what's the first passport that people go after? It really depends on what their goals are. However, it's normally the first passport is a hereditary passport that they might not know that they qualified for. That's always number one because it's typically the fastest, right? So if they didn't know that because their mom is Irish and they can prove it, they could get an Irish passport, or if they didn't know that because their dad is Grenadian and they can prove it, they can get a Grenadian passport or whatever, that passport is the first one because it's the fastest one, right? It's typically, let me see your, you know, parents' birth certificate, and we go from there, right? Okay, fine. Now the hereditary passports are done. Sometimes there's two of them, right? Because sometimes the hereditary passport might be something about like any of your parents being whatever, right? So if one of your parents was, I don't know, Grenadian and the other one was Trinidadian, you can get both passports, right? It doesn't have to be both parents, right? So your hereditary passports are typically number one. And then number two, it's going to depend on what it is you're trying to accomplish with your family dynasty and your generational wealth plan. But it's typically Grenada or Vanuatu. Those are typically, Grenada gives you access to the EC Bank, which is an incredibly stable bank, right? So you get access to that economy, which is great for investments and so on and so forth. And Vanuatu gives you access to really solid kind of like offshore company and offshore trust deals. And they're both relatively easy to acquire, right? So those two are typically in the first, tranche of passports that passport portfolio client typically acquires. Now, depending on all kinds of factors, including life goals, ethnic background, so on and so forth, that might change. We've had people that the first one they got was the first one after hereditary was like Hong Kong, you know. So it just depends. Digital nomad, you can't have any local clients. So if you have local clients or you're open to having local clients, then you need a class G. And we have no idea if they're going to do like stings. So we have no idea if like eventually if you've applied as a digital nomad if they're going to have like somebody try to be a client and see if you stop them. We don't, it's brand new. This was the first year of digital nomad, so we don't know what they're going to do with that. But if you have a local client, you violate digital nomad permit. So if you're going to have local clients, then you need to have a class G, not a class N. Good question though. Anything else with the permits? Today is permit day. Anything else? Immigration permits, corporate permits, spousal permits. No, you cannot work on a student pass. And like in America, a student permit has a rider that you can get that allows you to work for like a year after you graduate, right? That doesn't exist here. So you need to be prepared to convert to another permit after graduation in order to go work or whatever. The good thing though is you're here, right? It's really, really, really difficult to get hired abroad, but you're here. So you can actually go to companies and like apply and interview and all of that and just let them know like I don't have the right to work. So you're going to have to sponsor a class D permit for me in order to work. And of course, if you have a technical field and you've been trained, there's a chance that you can do it. The 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 part that needs to be overcome by the company ends up being, well, if you went to school here and you got your degree here, they have to prove that a Kenyan couldn't have done the job in order to get the permit. So same as the United States, actually. So if you graduated from a Kenyan university with a specialization in whatever, what about your classmates? Why do you get the job instead of them, right? All immigration departments have a mandate to protect the jobs of citizens over foreigners. That's why business ownership is typically your best way in from like an employment standpoint versus getting a Class D. Class D is really, really tough. The last class D. The last class D that we worked on, it was a bone marrow transplant specialist. Because typically when kids have sickle cell anemia and they need a bone marrow transplant, they typically like fly to India to get it. Um, and so that was something that they could prove. Look at all these people going to India for this bone marrow transplant. Kenyans can't do it. We need a class D for this person. And then that's a situation where the understudy thing gets murky, right? Because you need to be a surgeon. I can't just pick up some person on the side of the street and make them the understudy for the bone marrow transplant specialist, right? So that's where you get into situations where you can get the government to be like, okay, there's no understudy. And then your class D almost becomes kind of like permanent because you're not training anybody to take your place because they need a medical license. You can't just train people. They need to be specialized in, surgery, and then they need their specialization in, maybe bone marrow typing or whatever the case may be, right? So it becomes a situation where there's an unreasonable burden on the employer to create the understudy, and so you can essentially get a waiver. But you can see how like special that is, how rare it is. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yes, I am still sick. I was way more sick yesterday though. Like yesterday I did that entire live in pain, which is why I ended it so quickly. But yeah, they said it was going to be 48 hours. We're coming up on 48 hours and I'm almost 100%. So it was a stomach bug. It was a stomach bug. Yeah. Horrible. Henrock said, wait till I'm 50 yesterday. That would be manufacturing. You're just manufacturing electricity. And there is somebody doing a nuclear power plant right now. But yes, that would be manufacturing. So you could come in under a manufacturing permit, under a niche manufacturing permit for a nuclear power plant. Just remember, all that TikTok talk stuff don't work out here. In order to get business permits, you got to put up $100,000. It's put up or shut up. So all that talk about your brilliant idea and your brilliant business and this, that, and the third, and all you got is an LLC on paper, that's not going to cut it. So the startup cost is the most. Well, you're not paying the 100,000. But even our Class K permit folks, Henrock, can qualify typically for a Class G. Because most of the people who do business with us are doing business with us all inclusive, right? So all inclusive of them getting land, buying a house, sometimes they upgrade to a car and all of that, right? So like their package is like $180,000, $220,000, like whatever, right? So they're able to put 100,000 if they want one of these permits instead of a Class K, and they want to be able to do business. By virtue of the fact that they can afford the package, they can set up the 100,000 in advance, get qualified for a Class G or a Class whatever, off of that 100,000, and they don't lose it. They just got to put up or shut up. So after they put it up and they get the permit, you can then withdraw that money and then go build their factory with it, or withdraw that money, go build their house with it, or any of that stuff. So most of our clients can qualify for any permit they want. The only permit that they sometimes get stuck on that they don't qualify for is the Class K, because if they're 30, which we run into people as young as like 26 who got the 100,000, and they just end up getting a Class G because they're way too young to get a Class K. So that's the only thing with the Class K. is if you're too young, you can't. There's no way for us to like get a waiver for your age. So if you're too young, you just can't get a Class K. Right now, if you're 34, because they have that rule about applying 6 months ahead, right? That we might be able to work. But outside of that, if you're not, 35 or 34 and a half, there's nothing we can do. So those folks sometimes are essentially forced into a Class G or possibly a Class N because they don't have the age requirement for a Class K. And I think the government just looks at it as like, look, you have no work authority on a Class K. You're supposed to be somebody who can invest in the country based on your money that's coming from outside of the country. So I think in their heads, they're just thinking to themselves, especially because these things have been in place for years, with the exception of the Class N. So, 40 years, this stuff has been in place, a lot of it. So it's like, in their head, it's like, if you're not even 35 years old, how do you have enough money coming in from outside of the country to support yourself here? So I think that's the rationale of the government with the Class K, since you're not allowed to work. And then their rationale of people who are looking for citizenship, it's either you're married to one of the citizens and you stay married for the 7 years, and then you can, so there's no fiance visas like in the United States, or you prove that you can support yourself in this country without, using welfare essentially, right? For 7 years. And then, okay, fine, you can be a citizen because you're not a drain on the system. So those are the two kind of methods and the two rationales that I'm assuming the government has on that. So the startup costs are going to vary for whatever like industry you're doing, right, Henrock? So your startup costs could be extraordinarily low, they could be extraordinarily high. One of the beautiful things currently, since 2003, the bond market here has been so good that we've been able to bring people in, get them a Class G permit, let them open up business, and then let their runway into business be bond coupon payments. So they would come in, set up their bond coupon payments, and then have that be owned by the company. And so those payments would be going into the company every month, and they wouldn't have to reinvest in the company. A lot of people, they drop 100, 200, $300,000 in their startup from bootstrapping. So they're bootstrapping their startup, and they're paying all this money into the startup over the first 2-3 years until that startup starts making a profit. Well, here they could just drop 75,000 into the bond ladder, right? And then the bond would be paying every single month into their startup. So they could literally start a business and walk away from it. And whether it had, clients or not, they could support that business the same way they would as a bootstrapper, but without actually having to come up with the money themselves, right? So that's how people who are doing the business aspect of it actually add in the bond ladder offering and then keep their business flowing without having to make any additional investments into it. And my trust will own the business, not me. Yeah, you can definitely do it that way. You can definitely do it that way. Makes a ton of sense as far as protecting you because you're typically the weak link, right? So, and a lot of people don't realize this. Like a lot of people lean into, oh, my LLC has limited liability. If something happens with my LLC, I'm not liable. They're not incorrect. All right. In general, there are negligence factors and commingling and whatever, right? But in general, they're not incorrect. The problem is they're the weak link. You own the membership units, which is the stock of the LLC directly. So if you get into a car accident and your insurance doesn't cover the whole thing, the judge can order you to turn over your ownership units, your stock of that LLC to the creditor, all right, or the debtor, or the judgmenter, whatever, type of case you're going through, right? So you can lose your business to somebody else, even though the business has limited liability. You can lose your equity in that business in court. right? There's no limited liability shield that protects you from that judgment. So when the trust owns the company, you're protected, right? You're the beneficiary. That's something that you can't give to somebody else. You can't give that to a creditor or a judgment or anything like that. You're the beneficiary. The trustee is a corporation. You're the one who authorized the trust deed, so the trustee can only do the things that you authorize them to be able to do, and the trust owns all the businesses, and the trust doesn't operate at all. So if the trust isn't operating, it just holds share certificates, or membership certificates, depending on whether you have an LLC or a corporation, right? If that's all the trust owns, no one has standing to sue the trust. The only one that could possibly have standing to sue the trust is the beneficiary if they're claiming that the trustee did something wrong, and in that case, they're not actually suing the trust, they're suing the trustee for fiduciary misconduct, right? And so in those situations, your stuff is protected by the trust, right? And it's just a matter of making sure that the trust is set up appropriately, so that you have no unexpected situations pop up from the trust, and that just boils down to your professional. So while you can own the business, it is smarter to have your trust own the business. Same thing with the bonds. It's smarter to have the trust own the bonds because, again, you get in a car accident. If you own the bonds, a judge can force you to turn them over, right? So a judge can force you to, convert ownership of those bonds to whoever beat you in that lawsuit. But if the trust owns the bonds that are paying for your lifestyle, you're fine. The judge cannot order the offshore trust to sell its assets to satisfy your judgment. Right? You might be right in a domestic trust because a domestic trust is under the judge's jurisdiction. That's why I said offshore trust. An offshore trust, a judge in this jurisdiction will look at the judgment from the jurisdiction in which you live and not care at all about that judgment in any way, shape, or form. It just depends on which country. That's why you need a professional. Because there are some countries that'll be like, oh yeah, we'll do whatever the American judge says, even though it's not in the jurisdiction. So you got to choose a company that does not respect foreign judgments. If you choose a country that doesn't respect foreign judgments, then you're good. And the wording in the trust has to be specific to protect you from foreign judgments as well. But that's what your professional is for. Again, you're working off of your local knowledge, right? So what is it? Murrah? So Murrah says, yeah, but if the money goes into the trust and then flows from the trust to the beneficiary, there's a taxable event. That might be true wherever you are, but you choose the countries strategically. Kenyan law is that with a specific type of trust, the type of trust that we utilize, every year, every beneficiary is entitled to a distribution of 10 million tax exempt. So in that situation, it does not matter that the money goes into the trust first and then finds its way to the beneficiary, because the trust is allowed to do up to 10 million per year per beneficiary in tax exempt distributions. This is not our first day. We don't pick countries poorly. We don't. All our trusts are not Kenyan trusts. No one country has all the answers. So depending on what is happening, if we're doing like an asset protection trust, we may do that out of Mauritius. We may do it out of Singapore. If we're doing a family office trust, we're definitely doing it out of Singapore. So it all depends on what kind of trust it is. But in this situation, being able to get that 10 million tax exempt distribution annually is enough to make this jurisdiction the right place for this particular type of trust under the scenario that we're talking about. But yeah, if you have a consultation with us, or if you have a legal consultation with one of our lawyers or whatever, and they give you a different jurisdiction, then it's because your situation is different, and so they're gonna point at the jurisdiction that makes the most sense for you. Yeah, sure. Yeah, like we've done like a Class G permit, and then it was a hotel, right? So it was like a beach hotel, and then the international booking company was a Seychelles IBC owned by a Mauritius trust. So the corporate tax rate on all international bookings was 0% because it's a Seychelles IBC. So any local person booking, anybody who tries to book at that hotel and their IP address is in Kenya, it would automatically send them to a local booking house. They would book in-house essentially. And any international IP address would automatically be rerouted to the Seychelles booking company, and that booking company pays 0% tax on net profits because it's a Seychelles IBC. So it just depends. It depends on the setup. Depends on what's going on. What was the purpose of the Mauritius Trust? Because Seychelles was on the gray list for a while, right? Because it allowed banking secrecy. So, like countries that allow banking secrecy essentially get punished by the rest of the world. And so, Mauritius and Seychelles had like special agreements. So, having the Seychelles Trust own, or I'm sorry, the Mauritius Trust own the Seychelles IBC, your bank account could be in Mauritius, even though the business was in Seychelles. And so, in that way, if you made any kind of payment from Seychelles into Kenya at that time, it's not necessarily true now, but at that time, something coming in from Seychelles might be more scrutinized by the central bank as that money coming in, whereas there are a bunch of legal treaties and all of that through Mauritius. So money coming in from Mauritius happens daily here, and so it's a smooth transaction. So that's why at least at that time it made sense. Seychelles has actually been removed from the gray list like 2 years ago. So now maybe we wouldn't even do that because there's a little bit of tax that has to be paid in Mauritius at that point, right? But it's still not much, like 1.5%. So now, if we maintained everything in Seychelles, especially now that it's off the gray list, it would all be 0%, right? So it just depends on your specific situation and what your goals are, right? That particular hotel doesn't even advertise locally. So any advertisement that you would see for that particular hotel, you would see internationally. So they advertise on different international markets. Like when you go into Facebook advertising and all that, if you've ever done anything like that, you can choose what countries, what cities you want to see the advertisement. They don't even advertise locally, and it's not that they won't take a local client. It's just that they know they have to pay way more taxes on every local client that steps in. Now, when someone arrives at the hotel, everything they buy there, they still got to pay VAT. They still got to pay all the local taxes on, right? But they had it set up so that all their international bookings were going through an international booking agency, and so they save taxes on those bookings, and only a very specific type of tax. But it just again, it depends on you know what the goal is. There are other ways to offset tax. You know what I mean? So If you have one of those other ways under your belt, then you might accept the full tax liability in country and then almost essentially have a write-off, and have that write-off, reduce your taxable income every year. And it might be enough that you get the same kind of leverage by doing that. So it just depends on what your personal situation is and what your goal is. That's what the consultations are for. It's really hard to get into everyone's exact personal situation in a TikTok live or a YouTube live or an Instagram live or a Facebook live or. All right, we're approaching 2 hours. You see, I'm way less sick than I was yesterday, right? I had to run away from the live in 45 minutes yesterday. So we are at 2 hours. Any question on this topic? I think, how many of you guys saw the social media posts about what the topic was going to be tonight? Let me know in the chat if you saw the social media post. That's the way we're going to do it moving forward. So like after this live in an hour or two, I know it's late for some of you guys, but when you wake up in the morning, there'll be a post that explains exactly what the next live is going to be. So you guys will be able to see that in advance. So definitely check Facebook, probably Instagram, possibly LinkedIn. We have not started pushing them on TikTok yet because the algorithm is funky. You might not see it unless you purposely come to our TikTok and look. So there's that. But definitely Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, you'll be able to see what the live is going to be about. New Year's Eve. We'll still be here because, as you can see, even though it's nighttime for you, assumedly, if you're a U.S. viewer, it's daytime for us. So for me, it's going to be New Year's Day when you're still waiting for New Year's Day. So I probably will be here. Okay. All right. Cool. So you guys did see the post. All right. Awesome. So Instagram saw the post. Very cool. All right. So yeah, we'll keep doing that. All right. Any other questions? All right. If there are no other questions, I got a sad day today, man. My governess is leaving us. We're getting a new governess. That new governess is going to have really big shoes to fill. I highly doubt they're going to be able to fill them. So we shall see. So, all right, if that's it, then I will call it. Thanks for hanging out with me, Freedom Family, and we will see each other tomorrow.